So you said season. This is a debate among the podcasting community, Kristina. And it's kind of like, hey, should I have seasons? Should I have an ongoing podcast? And I would love to know what you think from like a marketing standpoint. Is it worthwhile to break your show up into seasons for marketing purposes? Because I think a lot of people are worried they're going to lose steam if they stop for a season. Welcome to Podcast Coaching with Christine. I'm your host, Christine O'Donnell. I'm an Emmy-nominated TV journalist and podcast coach. Each week, I interview someone who has an exceptional story and talent to help independent podcasters grow their shows. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Podcast Coaching with Christine. If you are a podcaster and you are listening to this show, you might have thought about what are the best ways for me to market my show. Should I have a pre-marketing strategy? Should I have a post-marketing strategy? Are the audiograms that I'm using the best use of my time? Should I be posting in all of the places? Should I have some sort of marketing funnel? And where do I start? Where do I stop? How overwhelming is this process? Is there a structure, a plan, something that can help me like figure this out so that I'm making the most of my time, my podcast, and if it's possible for me to turn some of my audience into customers, paying customers, what does that even look like? You guys, you are in luck because on my show today, I have Kristina Kury, and she is the founder and CEO of Sprout Creative. She and her company work with passionate small business owners who are busy running their business and or podcasters who are busy podcasting. These people, I'm one of them. I totally feel like I fit your demographic, Kristina. They are overwhelmed with the marketing and they feel at times that their growth may have plateaued, and they turn their marketing and they want to turn their marketing into a manageable, automated, stress-free marketing machine. Kristina is also a co-host of an amazingly hilarious show called Laughing with Gingers, where two feisty redheads with loud laughs share crazy stories, play games, and spread silliness and joy everywhere. It is the podcast we all needed this pandemic. Kristina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Thank you for being here. And thank you for your podcast. Thank you for your time. How you feeling? How's it going?
You know, it's going good. I started the podcast in the last summer, actually, with my co-host, Sarah Alapin, and we wanted to bring some lightness to the world. Last summer was very bleak and dark.
Yeah, a year ago today.
Mm-hmm.
Bleak, dark. Mm-hmm. I was super duper pregnant.
Wow. Yeah.
2 months away from delivery.
Ugh, COVID baby. That's hard to have a baby during COVID.
I would say it was something I will always remember, as I think all of us will remember our time during COVID, but there was nothing like walking to the emergency room with my mask on, like stopping every few minutes because I was about to deliver. Kristina, I don't know if I ever told you the story, and I don't believe I've even shared it on this podcast, but I delivered within an hour of being checked into the hospital. Like,
holy
it
moly.
happened very quickly.
Oof.
Yeah. And I think I think that I would have thought like, oh, if it happens that quickly, it'll be easy peasy. It just means your body's doing what it's supposed to be doing. I think the stress of my body doing what it was doing so quickly was like a really scary thing for me. I was like,
I think childbirth in general is scary for your body and your mentality and everything. And then, adding all the circumstances around you can feel a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. But off of childbirth and onto marketing strategies for our podcast.
And here we are, a year later.
Here we are, 1 year later, talking about marketing. So for the independent podcaster who's listening and they're kind of wondering, hey, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Like, where should they start thinking about their marketing strategy?
Well, it's got to start with your ideal client. That is or ideal listener. This is the framework that you're going to build your marketing strategy around and how to talk to your people, quote unquote. And this is something, I approached my podcast as a fun thing that didn't have anything to do with my business. And after our first season, I was like, oh, maybe we should kind of treat this like a business and maybe we could make some money from this. And it's not just a fun thing that we're doing. So after season 1, we actually developed a marketing plan. So we interviewed our top listeners. So the people that were kind of interacting with us and talking with us, and engaging with us. Oh, did you have a question, Christine?
Did you interview them on your show or interview them off your show?
So it was off our show. We DM'd them. Most of them were on our Instagram, and we asked, hey, can we pick your brain about our podcast? It seems like you listen a lot. You're a fan. And I think, interviewed about 4 people. I have a 5-page questionnaire kind of freebie that I'm happy to give to you guys, your listeners. And this freebie it'll have a guideline of questions. But again, you want to kind of just enter into that space of very curious being. Just ask all the questions, pick their brain, because you're going to find some gems in there that you had no idea that your ideal listener was thinking. And this can really set your podcast on a different path. It did ours. When we asked our ideal clients about our podcast, they actually didn't like that we had so many guests on. They wanted to hear me and Sarah more. And so now we're a little more picky about our guests and how often we bring them on. And we start to warm them up, like prepare them. Hey, we might be having a guest on, and we kind of lead them into that. And it's been a substantial change for us and in our listenership. So that is where you want to start. And through that questionnaire, you're going to find out, are they hanging out on Instagram, or are they on YouTube? Are they Redditors? Are they, what other podcasts are they listening to? If you find other podcasts that they listen to in other genres, start bringing those in as guests, start partnering up with those other podcasts, because there's probably similarities between your 2 audiences then. And really find that common thread that's sort of weaving throughout your interviewees.
So a great takeaway. I think this is great. Like, the idea of not having to guess who your ideal audience is, and actually you're doing the market research, you're figuring it out, you're asking the questions. And I think that like an action item that I'm hearing is that you had an Instagram that you were sending people to through the podcast at the beginning of the podcast. So I think that there are a number of podcasts out there who start a show and don't necessarily plan to have a
Instagram.
Thank you. Instagram or a Facebook page or maybe a Twitter, but a way to interact with people so that when you're talking on your show, you can be like, hey, if you want to talk to me on like a more one-on-one basis, find me on Twitter at the Kristina D, or find me on Instagram at the Kristina D, and, send me a DM. Or maybe it's taking it that one step further and starting your own Instagram page for your podcast.
Yeah, we launched with our own Instagram and Facebook page for our podcast initially. Just, I'm in marketing and my co-host does a lot of social media too. So that was easy for us. If you don't have anything and you're wondering, how do I even find the listener that loves me? Just reach out to them right there on your podcast. Say, hey, we want to hear from you and your opinion. How can we make this experience better for you? Come find me here or email me here, and I want to interview you. And you can always say, hey, there's a little goodie in it for you, and give them, a Starbucks gift card or something like that.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of people are doing that. They're sharing the Starbucks barcode and like in their Insta stories, and like, hey, there's $100 on here. The first 100 to thank you for being a listener. Please don't buy too many coffees so other people can enjoy it.
For others.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. And also, so there's people out there that love to give you their opinion. So definitely when you're asking questions, take it with a grain of salt, but also do take it in and sort of process it and break it down. And you really truly might find something that you're like, wow, I didn't even think that my ideal clients or my ideal listeners were thinking that or wanting that from me. And it can really help. And I would say make it a practice after every season is over to check back in either with the same ones or sprinkle in a few new ones that you've got. And it can really help drive that ship in the right direction.
Kristina. And it's kind of like, hey, should I have seasons? Should I have an ongoing podcast? And I would love to know what you think from like a marketing standpoint. Is it worthwhile to break your show up into seasons for marketing purposes? Because I think a lot of people are worried they're going to lose steam if they stop for a season.
So we do 16 episodes in a season. There's no rhyme or reason. We just had that in our brain and did it. Like you said, it truly is kind of, you build it how you want to build it. And I think if it depends on your podcast, let's say you're kind of an educational podcast, I think it makes sense to break it in seasons. If you're like, this season we're focused on this subject. So then your listeners kind of, oh, okay, well, I know I can go back whenever I want to learn about that subject into season 1. You can break it up in that way. Ours, it doesn't quite make sense why we broke it up because we're just kind of a fun comedy podcast. But if it does make sense, I think that you can really leverage that and make it work to your advantage. In my brain, it works because we kind of know, okay, we're breaking after 16 episodes. It feels like I can have a breather for a minute. And we actually, in between our seasons, run our top 3 podcasts from that, our top 3 episodes from that one season that we just finished running. So we give ourselves about a 3-week break and then we launch back into it. It doesn't seem like it breaks because we're relaunching, our top podcast, but
Got it. So you air replays. You schedule replays for your off season of your top shows. And so it's literally like, is there a new intro, outro, or is it just like a copy paste replay?
I believe we write it in the, no, we just repost it. We don't even acknowledge that it's
except for in the copy, just in the copy.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hey,
in the copy we do.
Mm-hmm.
Replay from season 1 or whatever it was. And it actually kicks up our listenership, surprisingly. So, or maybe not surprisingly.
Well, I think that it makes sense because sometimes I feel like podcast listeners, depending on the kind of show that you have, they don't necessarily go back to the beginning to listen to where you started. They kind of just pick it up. And if you do them the service of being like, hey, here's our best episodes during your off season, I think that's a great idea. Yeah. Or like, what's something else people could do? Like you could maybe just do some evergreen episodes, maybe one where you just take Q&As, maybe recordings from the audience, like, hey, leave me a message. Call me and leave me a message or something. I feel like there's a number of different things people can do.
Repurpose content. That is a very key thing to do in marketing, repurposing content.
So when you say repurposing content, do you mean like podcast content or like, what does that mean to someone who doesn't know? Yeah.
Good question. Well, one podcast I listened to, they actually took their live comedy recordings and bundled them up into an episode and had 4 different comedians where they just recorded the live audience, and introed them each little section. They took a piece of what the live comedy show was, which is fantastic. And then I would say on top of that, they can take components of that and break them apart and create social media posts, little clips here and there. So Sarah Silverman does it for her podcast. She'll post an Instagram TV, IGTV, a snippet of that podcast that week. And it pulls you in and it makes you want to go and listen to that episode that week if it's a topic that pulls you in, and You can, there's tons of different ways you can do clips onto YouTube. So someone stumbles upon you on YouTube, you can pull them in that way as well. We post ours on YouTube, not any visual, but just the audio. Only our visual is for our Patreons only. And if you have a list that you're building, an email list, you can pull clips from that and tease it out as well. All different kinds of reworking. And like we do, we post our top content during our off season, and therefore it gives us a break and we get a couple weeks off, we can breathe, and that viewership increases substantially because it was already a top one.
Yes, that makes so much sense. Also, I think that it is really important for independent podcasters who are doing all of this themselves to build in a break for themselves.
Yes. Yeah. Or you'll never get through it all.
You need a break.
You need a break.
I love the idea of taking a break and airing a replay during that time. Or maybe it's like, okay, we're taking a break and maybe it's instead of 3 weeks, maybe it's 6 weeks, and you just let people know like these are going to be bi-weekly replays or something, or just something so that you
break
can give yourself a break, because there's other things that you're going to want to do, like as part of your marketing strategy. Like, I'm laughing because, guys, if you don't know, Podcast Coaching with Christine is not only available all the places you listen to your podcast, it's also available on YouTube. So I've got a fancy smancy camera that's not focusing. So that's why I think we're laughing. If I'm like,
she's bobbing around.
Like, hey, camera, focus on me. Yay, autofocus. But what we were talking about is that downtime in between seasons, if you are going to start like doing some sort of downtime. And also, this is a great idea for Christmas or like any holidays that you're going on vacation, summertime, like any time that you might need to schedule some time for yourself. Just let your listeners know, like, hey, this is what's going to happen these next 3 weeks. But what would you say other people like? I mean, I have some ideas of things people should do during the downtime. If it's not technically going to be downtime, it's like, okay, during this season where we're replaying our top episodes, we are also going to make a huge push to be interviewed on someone else's podcast with a like-minded audience every single day.
Oh yeah, that is a very lofty goal, but I love your thinking. I would also say start to work on your idea of your marketing funnel, how you want to pull these listeners in all the way through into paying for something, giving you money in your pocket. So think through what that listener journey might be for you and what's appropriate for your podcast.
Okay, I love this. Let's talk about this funnel thing.
Yes.
This customer journey thing.
Let's break it down.
So where does the funnel start? How does it stop? And what does this mean for podcasts, independent podcasters? How much work is it going to take?
So I think you just kind of whittle away at it like everything else. You can't just sit down and 2 hours later, you've got your funnel figured out. That's not what is going to happen. But I like to separate the funnel into 4 main groups. If you Google marketing funnel, there's going to be a ton, but 4 feels like it's an amount that I can handle, And the first part is the awareness. So this is where you're trying to capture the widest audience possible. And that's, through social media, or if you're running digital ads for your podcast, or if you're on another podcast, that's the top of your funnel. That's making people aware of you. This can be a freebie that you offer up, or an infographic that you have, anything like that. So this is where people are finding out about you. And then further into the funnel, it gets a little smaller. That's why it's a funnel, because then people start to fall off that maybe are like, well, that's not for me. So now you're increasing the interest and engagement. This is the interest and engagement, second part of the funnel. And now this is where you're starting to educate them really about what it is you offer. So it can be something a little deeper. Maybe you, start to interact with them now on social media, and you're starting to direct message them. They're direct messaging you, asking questions. Maybe you are hosting a webinar that talks about your podcast and teaches them something that you can teach them, and say, hey, for more, come to, listen to my podcast. And that'd be great for you, Christine. You could do a bunch of different kinds of webinars or summits, or be a speaker at different webinars and summits, and pull people into your podcast that way, because you have such a wealth of knowledge. And then this is where, if you have an email list, you want to pull them into an email list, because now you're going to start to want to talk to them. Why are you laughing? You're snickering.
Just like, wealth of knowledge. I was joking. I was made a joke. I wasn't gonna bring attention to it, but I brushed my shoulder like, oh no, big deal.
But you do. And a webinar can help pull people in that don't know about you and what you have to offer. It's a really good way to build that interest and engagement. And then the third part, again, it gets smaller, but more people are interested in it. And this is the consideration. They're considering maybe being more involved in what you're doing. They've bought that merchandise mug from you. They are attending those live events that you've, offered up. Or they're buying a course from you because they like everything you're teaching on the podcast. And now you've launched this really cool course, and now they're purchasing that course from you. And then, of course, the final stage is the action. They've bought your product. They love it. They've bought your digital download. They've bought into you. And they're the ones showing up at those live events and showing up for those courseworks or those webinars and things like that. Does that make sense? Did I overwhelm you?
I was following. I do have some questions for you.
Yes.
What if this podcaster who's listening right now out there, and they're wondering, hey, like my audience is only like 50 people, maybe, if that, like that I see my downloads. Does that even make sense for me to try and convert like 50 people, or is this like a build it and they will come? Like, how important is marketing to a podcast that has a small audience? Like, or maybe what if people don't have a ton of followers on social media? Like, is this something that should stop people before they start?
No, absolutely not. You go for it. Just jump in. And you want to start doing a lot of the top funnel things that I talked about. So you want to, let's say, build a real juicy freebie that you have that you're throwing up there. And it, can spread. Pinterest is a great space for infographics that can help. You can share that a bunch. Instagram's really wonderful. And if you can pull in other people, those partnerships with other podcasters, that's going to really help leverage their audience and help bring you up. And if you start doing, let's say you've got a guest on, or you're going to be a guest on someone else's podcast, go do an Instagram live with them. And so now that audience for them and for you is seeing both of that, Instagram live. Now I say Instagram live, you've already done your research and you know that maybe your ideal listener is on Instagram. So make sure Instagram is a platform that they are interacting and they are on, and then leverage those spaces that they're living. Maybe you're, I can say this. So one of my clients, she wasn't into podcasting. She didn't really listen to podcasts, and it wasn't on her radar. And we found out after all these interviews that every single one of her clients were on podcasts and listening to podcasts hardcore. And so I'm like, maybe you don't want to start a podcast, but you should 100% be engaging with podcasts and be on other people's podcasts. And that opened up a whole other door for her that she didn't even realize was there. So that's why those interviews are so important, because you're going to find out where those people are hanging out, how they're finding out about those podcasts that they like to listen to, and what it is they want. So you can pick their brains to see, well, what sort of freebie would pull you in? What sort of infographic would interest you? Or maybe it's an ebook that they would download to learn more, or, things like that. Maybe you're a blogger and that's an outlet that you can use and leverage.
So a thought that just came up for me is, what if, someone who's just starting out in the podcasting space, or maybe they've been podcasting for a while, but they never actually thought about creating maybe a product or something to sell to people.
Mhm.
Like maybe that was never part of their plan. For like maybe they just thought like, hey, I'm gonna produce a podcast. It's gonna be awesome, and I'm gonna get all these advertisers because people are gonna love it so much. That is not really the case for most independent podcasters, not to like blow the wind out of anybody's sails. Totally possible. Just it's very like specific strategy, and there should be a budget for advertising for podcasts who are looking to do that. But I'm kind of like trying to like ask this question because I think that there are people who are podcasting because they love it, because they feel like they have this mission or thing to share with the world, but they don't really know what their value proposition is, what their thing is that people might pay for. So they don't have a really specific strategy to create any sort of funnel. So do you have any thoughts on how maybe someone could figure that out?
That's a really good question. It's very podcast specific. So for us, we were just a comedy podcast. I'm just like that person. We went in not thinking we're going to make money, not really expecting that. And then we ended up creating a line of merchandise that pulled some of our more frequent sayings that we actually joke about and say on the show onto t-shirts and mugs and stickers. And that just happened organically. But because these were phrases that we kept saying over and over and that were funny to us and some of our audiences, we just slapped it on some merch, and now we're selling merch. And live events are a really great thing for podcasters to consider. Sell tickets to live events. You could even take a tour. So during that downtime that you're replaying, old episodes, you can say, I'm on tour. That's why we're replaying, our top podcast from season 2. Come find me live, and sell those tickets and book those live events. You can even do live webinars. It's such, obviously because of the pandemic, everyone can hop on a webinar and it's totally fine and acceptable. And you can dive deeper into episodes and say, hey, if you liked that episode about that thing, we're doing a live webinar that we dive even deeper into that thing that happened or that we talked about. Yes.
So I had an idea as well, and I'd love to know what you think about this, but I think pushing yourself to be interviewed on other shows will help you figure out what your USP is. Before you realize it, you're going to start, like, people will interview you. And if you'd like push yourself to be on maybe 10 shows, like, I mean, that's a lot. Like if you get yourself on 10 shows,
that's a lot.
If you push yourself to try and be on 10 shows and you start to realize, oh, this person is really interested in this one thing about me. Oh, this person is interested in that same one thing. Okay. Like I didn't think that was that big of a deal, or like, that's just something that comes, like, I just didn't think that was a thing for me, but it might surprise you. So if you're feeling really lost on what your unique value proposition might be, if you're going to start selling something, like I imagine it might be really helpful for you to be on someone like other people's shows, just to see like, why are people interviewing you? Why do people care beyond the fact that you have a podcast? What is something that keeps coming up in interviews? And that might help you figure out your thing.
I love that because it's sort of the reverse of you interviewing your ideal listener. You're being interviewed, and out of those interviews, series of interviews, you're going to understand your north, your true north.
Yeah. I feel like, just like personally, like side note, like it has taken me a little bit of time to figure out like, oh, what's my unique thing? And I don't know if this is like a broadcaster flaw. Like I wasn't trained in marketing. My background, for anyone who's just here new, my background's in TV news. I was a TV news reporter for over a decade, and I worked in top markets across the country. And objectivity is like the thing, the name of the game. Like I like, it's like beaten out of you, not beaten physically, but like mentally, you really learn how to not have an opinion about things and how to interview
Mm,
people so you're transparent.
mm,
My like goal for myself as a reporter was to be a glass window where you don't see
mm,
Christine, you don't see Christine's personality, you don't see anything about me, you just see through me to the story. Like it's so like so that there's no absolutely like no slant. And I know
mhm.
people don't really believe in that, that there is no slant, but I'm telling you, like local journalists across the country, before they like really make it into those big markets, a lot of them, at least in my like my age generation and before me, it was all like, don't have a personality. That's why people come across so robotic on the news and they get made fun of. But it's because like, it's like, hey, don't have a personality, just be as transparent as possible. So I think for me, it took me a while to figure out like, oh, what's my thing?
Mm.
How am I going to grab people's attention? How am I going to sell to people? What am I going to sell to people? I'm a journalist. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's common. I mean, I've
Mhm.
listened to podcasts from the start to now, and there is an evolution. I think it's natural, and I think it's really great to have that evolution and be figuring your thing out. And I live in a world of entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and no one has it figured out on day one. And I don't think that's even accurate in the podcasting world. Even if you're super famous and you've got all this money and all this like, whole agency that helps you plan out everything to the T, you're still going to have an evolution. And I think it's wonderful and beautiful.
I love that you bring that up because like not only did that happen to me, but I think like I coach this, and that's also how I found like, oh, podcast coaching might be my thing. It's a great mix of like journalism, writing, podcasting, marketing, broadcast skills if you're also doing it video and in front of the mic. Some, you know. Um so where am I going? This like happens to me all the time. I like
Evolution.
okay, evolution, thank you. Kid problems, my
Yeah,
brain.
yeah. Mom
Blah.
brain.
Okay. So where I was going was with this evolution. I work with a number of podcasters who like really like want to have it all figured out. And they're like, okay, this is my strategy. This is it. Like, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, great. So like, did you survey your audience? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't do that. I was like, okay, well, we should probably back up. Like survey your audience, and there's a couple different ways to do this. Like we could do it on Facebook. You could email the people you've like emailed in the past. Like you don't necessarily have to have an email list, but I bet you got a bunch of emails in whatever email you use the most, and just like you could email them, email people
Mhm.
and just ask them questions like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast, this is what I was thinking, what do you think? And maybe even create like a short Google form survey
Mhm.
to do that.
Mhm.
So so evolution, you might start one place and you might do this, and then as you grow in your podcasting journey, your show might change, and all
Yeah.
of that research that you did at the beginning
Mhm.
like
It's
might
gonna
be
change.
different like over the years, because people podcast
Mhm.
for years after like
Mhm.
years on end. And so as you grow, I'm sure your audience is going to grow, and some people may
Mhm.
stay with you, some people may fade away, and then it's,
Mhm.
how do I figure out where my new audience is? Are they still
Right.
out there? What do I do
Yeah, and
now?
are they
Yeah.
still thinking the same thing that they did in the beginning? And this is, always go back and visit those ideal listeners and talk to them, and the new ones that cycle through. And, we do it at the end of each season. It just, that natural break just makes sense for us. But you can always, say every 7 episodes or every 10 episodes, I'm going to ask a couple of people some questions and just chit chat for them, just 15 minutes of their time, pick their brain, and make those adjustments, those little micro adjustments. I think it's so important.
Yeah. Me too. And I think that's great advice. And I wouldn't be afraid if your podcast changes. Like it likely
Oh,
will.
embrace that. Yeah,
Like,
I hope it
yeah.
does.
Like you might start with like hour-long episodes and then they might turn into 30-minute episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oops.
Yeah.
Like it turns out my audience likes shorter episodes than longer episodes. And like, or maybe
Mhm.
there's a mixed bag. Maybe people love when you have guests, or maybe people love solo episodes. Like
Mhm.
there's just, it just changes and changes and changes. So I just think
Mhm.
that's so interesting and important to keep surveying your audience.
Mhm.
And maybe there's like a mix of things that like offer the most growth. Like having guests may help you grow your show because then you can tap into their network, or maybe like a guest
Mhm.
co-host. Um, or like verse like all of the one-on-ones, the
Yeah,
solo
it
episodes. I don't know if that just
right.
made sense.
It did. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think having guests on can absolutely extend your audience and tap into their audience. If having guests on isn't quite a thing that you do, which we don't do. I think it's like every 3 episodes now we have. And that was our strategy going in. We want a guest to help grow our audience, but our audience didn't really like us having guests all that much. So that's totally fine. So we're now leveraging Instagram Live, and we're bringing people on there, and that's helping us gain a little more exposure to their audience as well as our audience. And it's like a mini version of our episode, but we're actually interacting with the audience and pulling
Mm-hmm.
them in that way. You know, we play games and tell jokes on our podcast. So we actually play a game on our lives and ask people to give us their response as well. So the audience plays along with us.
I love that. Also like a funnel to your funnel.
Yeah. I know, because we want to do live events eventually. We want to go
Mm-hmm.
on a little tour and just poke around wherever we want to go and have a bunch of live events that people can come join us.
Where would your ideal place be to tour?
Um, oh my gosh, I don't even know. Well, I guess I would like to go to the East. So my co-host is actually on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast, and I've literally only met her a couple of times in real life. Yeah, it's kind of funny. The podcast brought us together. So I would personally like to tour around the East Coast. I'm sure she would like to come to California because we have a lot of common friends in California. So who knows? Who knows where it'll take us?
Hawaii.
That would be amazing. I think most of our listeners are from Hawaii, so we should probably go there.
That's a
No,
great
I don't know
plan.
that. I made that up.
Like, that
I
makes
fudged
total
the
sense.
data to make it look like everyone's from Hawaii.
Looks like we've got a lot of people listening from Hawaii. So that's top of the list. Oh gosh. I feel like I know so many people who have gone to Hawaii now that they can go on vacation, and it makes me want to go. I've never
I
been.
know. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Um So, kind of, I have some systems questions. I think that people are always interested about systems, and especially if you have a co host. So, like, what systems do you use to figure out who's going to be your guest? Or if you don't have a guest, like, your recording times, like, do you just use Google Calendar? Do you like send out invites? Do you like at share
Mhm.
Calendly, like what are your systems? And also, if you're planning marketing content and you're splitting this up with a co-host, like who does it? When do you do it? When do you release your audio? Do you release an audio like grams? I know the answer, I'm just asking these questions. So what are your, like, I'd love to know like your marketing systems and your like podcast systems.
Well, so we have a spreadsheet. We were a little more organized in the beginning, and I think we need to lean back into being more organized. But we were more organized in the beginning because we did have these guests on each episode, almost every episode, and we sort of laid out a couple weeks in advance. Okay, we want this person to talk about this and talk about this, and we actually told them you don't have to do anything. Our guests, we just wanted them to come on and either play the game that we had made or tell some funny stories that they, that popped into their brain. The only thing we made them do is wear something red on their head because we're both gingers. And if they weren't redheads, we made them redheads, which doesn't make sense because we're a podcast and nobody can see your head, but it's fine. It made us laugh and we were okay with that. So we had a whole, this is the episode, a whole spreadsheet. This is the episode number. This is the season number. This is the date that we're recording. This is the date it's launching. This is who we're having. This is their contact information. This is the title, the subject, and then here's the description. And we just invite them to a Google Calendar. That's it. We just drop in the link. We use Zencastr to record our podcast. And so we invite them to the Zencastr link for that episode. And that was kind of the extent of it. We usually come up with what is happening a few weeks in advance so we can kind of do a little bit of prep work, but there's not a lot for us. Maybe like a half an hour each, maybe a little more. And it's not as involved, but we kind of, that was sort of by design too, because we both don't have a lot of time. And we're actually live to tape as well. So we don't do any editing at all. We don't edit out anything that's happening. We made that decision early on. We both don't like editing. And because, we didn't have a third person that liked editing, we're like, well, we're just not going to edit. And it's built a very authentic podcast for us. And we've learned how to control the time a little bit better, maybe because there's no time, we're not editing anything out, and also how to control the time with a guest on too. And how to pull that conversation through all the way to the end. So we're not letting them run amok and we're not also running amok, if that makes sense. So yeah. And what else was I going to say about that? I think too, it's saved us a lot of money because money is time. And by doing that live to tape, and it's kept us going because honestly, a lot of podcasts, I think what the stat is after episode 8, people fall off, most of them. And I think the editing is a big barrier for a lot of people.
I think editing for sure is a barrier for people. And I also think it takes like real time to get comfortable with the idea of not worrying about how much you say like or or we tend to be so super critical of ourselves and so it's like going live to tape. It's like,
yeah.
Okay.
Nobody cares how many times you're saying and like, and if they do care, they're not your ideal listener and they're going to fall off, and that's fine. You didn't need them anyway.
Exactly. And I think one of the reasons people listen to podcasts is so they feel included in a real conversation, not a hyper edited conversation. And like, I do want to caveat this, like there are going to be some shows where like this, it's really necessary for those edits, but in the interview style, conversational, co-hosted podcasts, I mean, it just to me makes so much sense for you to leave in all of our idiosyncrasies because we've all got them. And I think that it's what connects us to each other. It's so funny when I hear back from my audience or my like audience who turns into a customer and they're like, you know why I called you? Like, you know why I wanted to go this one step further? It's because I saw that video of you on Instagram where you were teasing your husband because he couldn't flare his nostrils. I'm like, it's like the weirdest stuff, right? It's just like the stuff that makes us human, like us teasing each other, like just like the little weird stuff. So if you're a little weird, lean into it.
Embrace it.
And I love that's what you guys for sure do with Laughing with Gingers. You like lean into all of your goofiness, all of like the silly stuff.
We get real and we say things and sometimes I'm like, well, that's not getting edited out. Okay, I put that out in the world. Great. Wonderful. Oops. Yep. That happened. But it's authentic and I personally don't like listening to heavy edited kind of conversational podcasts. I can hear it and it feels disruptive when I can hear that break and I'm like, ooh, what did they cut out? You know? I get a little like defensive, like, ew, what did they think I wasn't deserving of to listen to?
Ah, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
So the audiogram thing.
Mm-hmm.
Should podcasters be creating audiograms? How much time should they spend on them? What are your thoughts on this?
I think that it's important pulling components out of your podcast to share and pull people in. Like I said, Sarah Silverman posts a video of her. It's literally just her face. I think probably someone on her team has a camera right there on her, like a phone. And it's just a clip from her podcast. And it's clearly on her podcast. And it's just an IGTV. And like I said, that pulls me in to listen to those episodes. And that's how you can kind of tease out your content in a really great way. Make it easy. I mean, we've gone live on some of our podcasts through Facebook Live. We just went live and we're like, here's us, we're going live while we're also recording. And opening it up in whatever way is easiest for you, like make it so easy and do it as approachable as you can and sustainable, because the more consistent you can be with getting those things up there, the more your audience is going to get used to it and want to see it and want to build on it, the more you're going to be in their face about it. And consistency is really key.
And simplicity.
Yes.
Keep it
Thank you.
simple so
Yeah.
you can be consistent.
Yes.
I think that we think, at least I totally am guilty of this. Like, I need to be like, my audiograms, my promotional materials, like they have to be a step above the rest. Like they have to be amazing. Like I need to set the gold standard as a broadcaster turned podcast coach who's, been nominated for an Emmy and or won a number of journalism awards. Like I need to be amazing at all of it. No, simplify. Just simplify it, simplify it. Make it easy for you to be consistent.
Yeah. 100%. 100%.
And there are ways to do that so that you still are professional, look professional. Like, yes, you don't Canva is an amazing tool. Do you use Canva?
Yeah. I just taught a Canva 101 in class last week, Thursday, because there's so many great things about Canva that I think most people don't realize you can do. You can drop in your video right there with a frame with your logo on it. Boom. Done.
Jinx.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Spend some time in Canva and set up some templates and get yourself a little organized. And then it saves you time in the future. Schedule out those social media posts and get, I always tell clients, how much do you think you can commit to posting and coming up with content? And okay, if it's 3 or if it's 2 or if it's 1 a week, whatever it is, whatever your number is, stick to that and give it a solid 3 months to post on social media consistently in the way that you've already self-determined is at your capacity level. And you'll start to see a difference. You really will.
Do you need to be in all the places?
Absolutely not. So it goes back to that step 1 is your ideal client. And understanding they might not be on all the places. They probably aren't. Most of us aren't on all the places, but you need to be where your ideal client is. And I've had clients that have held on to a Twitter account since like 2009, and none of their clients are on there. They're wasting their time on there. I'm like, cut it. It's okay. The world will not come crashing down around you. You're not going to lose 1,000, followers that were your fans. It's okay. And the relief that they felt, their face, just the relief that they're like, oh, I can just stop posting on this thing that I really hate posting on. Because that's a barrier for you. If you hate it, you're going to do it less. You're going to do it inconsistently and you're going to be annoyed about it. And that's just no fun. Nobody wants to be in that space doing that stuff if they're annoyed by it.
Agreed. I so agree with you. Thank you for sharing that. We can't hear it enough. If you but that does mean you still need at least one place where people can contact you.
Yes.
Even if it's just an email, just some way that people can connect with you. An email. There's a great show. I don't know I think it's called Birds, Bees, Kids. Where
I haven't heard it.
Amy, the host Amy, just has people call in, and her whole podcast is her just answering people's questions on her like.
I love it.
Just like 3 or 4 questions. It's like, it's great. I love it because I personally have, kids that are of the age where they're starting to ask me, I say kids. I have 2 kids. One kid in particular who's starting to ask me a lot about his private parts. And I don't know what to say because we don't have the same equipment. And so
yes.
I don't
That's
want
a good calling question.
Shame about what's happening here. I just don't know what to say. I don't just do it in your room. For 3. I hope he never listens to this episode. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm just
you're overwhelmed. You're overwhelmed.
No, yeah, it's just, so she's got a great podcast for if things are happening with your kids and you're like, how do I have this conversation? She's like, here's your script. This is what you say when this happens. I'm like, oh my God, thank you, Amy.
She's a lifeline.
She is. I listen to her podcast and it's great. And I think it's called Ask Amy and Birds Beads Kids. Anyway, check it out if you're interested. Is there anything I missed, Kristina, that you would like to share today?
I think that's it. Just the freebie. I can send you the link so all your listeners can grab it. And it's a free downloadable, and it's go off script if you want. Ask all those questions, 5 pages, but it can help guide you in a curious way to really dig deep into who your listener is and how you can serve them best.
Thank you. I think that's a great freebie. I'm going to download it.
Good. Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you so much, Kristina. And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to another episode of Podcast Coaching with Christine. For more information on this week's episode, be sure to check the show notes. You can also find more information on my website, Christine-O'Donnell.com. There's a bunch of resources over there as well, and more information about my community if you would like to join it. Again, that's Christine-O'Donnell.com. If this podcast helped you in any way, please let me know. You can always screenshot that you've listened to this episode and then share it in your stories and tag me on Instagram. I am happy to reshare your story and let more people know about what you're doing, your podcast. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time.